I've only attended one wedding in my life. My own. I left before they cut the cake. My name is Walt Brennan. I'm 51 years old, and I run a small fleet of tow trucks out of a yard in Hamilton, Ontario. 500 people watched me cross that ballroom floor, and not one of them said a word. I should back up. I grew up in a bungalow on Province Street in the east end of Hamilton, the kind of street where every house had a chain-link fence and a hockey net rusting in the driveway by November. My father, Earl Brennan, started as a millwright at Stelco and ended up running the maintenance shop floor before the plant cut back in the 90s. After that, he drove tow trucks. Then he owned one, then he owned three, then he owned more than he ever told me about. He wore the same Navy Carhartt jacket for as long as I can remember, drove a Ford F-150 with a dent in the tailgate he never bothered fixing, and drank his coffee black out of a Tim Hortons mug that said, "World's okayest dad," which my mother bought him as a joke, and which he used every single morning for 15 years. He wasn't a talker. He read the Hamilton Spectator at the kitchen table every morning, the actual paper, ink on his fingers, and when I asked him for something unreasonable as a teenager, he'd just look at me over the top of it and say nothing, which was its own kind of answer. We weren't poor. Bills got paid. I played rep hockey. We took a week at a cottage on Georgian Bay every August. But we weren't the kind of family with a name anyone in Hamilton recognized either. There's a moment I've turned over a lot since everything happened. I was about 16. Somebody from the Hamilton Chamber of Commerce invited him to some recognition dinner downtown, suit and tie thing at the Sheraton. He looked at the invitation, set it on the counter, and said, "Don't do that stuff anymore, son." No explanation. I never asked twice. He kept a metal lockbox in the garage, the kind with a key, wedged behind a shelf of motor oil. I noticed it 100 times growing up. Never once saw it open. I used to think that was just who he was. I was wrong about a lot of things. I met Nicole Aldridge at a continuing ed welding certification course in Burlington, 3 years before everything came apart. She asked good questions, the kind nobody else in the room thought to ask, and she had this way of laughing that made you feel like you'd actually said something funny. I liked her fast. Took me a few months to say it out loud. We dated 8 months before I brought her home to Hamilton. That first visit went fine, on the surface. My mother fussed over her, made a roast. My father shook her hand, asked her 2 questions about her job in commercial insurance, then went back to his paper. Nicole told me afterward she found him quiet. I told her that was just him. Then she took me home to meet her family. The Aldridges lived in Oakville, the part with the 3-car garages and the landscaping crews that showed up Thursday mornings, whether the lawn needed it or not. Her father, Gordon Aldridge, was in commercial real estate development. Her mother, Sandra, ran the house, and from what I could tell, most of Gordon's social calendar too. The first time Sandra met my father was at a dinner I'd rather forget. He pulled up in the F-150. Nicole's eyes landed on the truck for half a second. Not a long look, something she'd have denied to her grave. Then she smiled at me. I filed that away and kept walking. 18 months into dating, I proposed. We planned the wedding for the following June. Somewhere in there, I turned down a senior operations manager position with a national logistics outfit out of Calgary. Better money, bigger scope, the kind of job I'd been working toward for years. I stayed because Nicole was in the GTA and I didn't want to ask her to choose. She never asked me to stay. She also never told me to go. I told myself it was a choice. I hadn't figured out yet that it was a test. The Aldridge house was the kind of place that made you straighten your collar walking in. High ceilings, framed photographs arranged on the wall, in a way that looked casual but clearly wasn't. A kitchen island big enough to park a sedan on. Sandra had set the table with real candles for what was supposed to be a casual Tuesday dinner. I clocked that right away. Casual dinners don't need candlelight. Sandra started in before the bread even came out. What did I do for work? How long had I been at it? What did growth look like from here? She wasn't hostile about it. Her voice stayed warm, her smile stayed put. But the questions had a shape to them, like a form you fill out to see if you qualify for something. Gordon mostly talked about the wine. Had opinions on what we were drinking, walked me through the label. Never asked me a single thing about myself. About 20 minutes in, Sandra steered it toward family. Asked about my parents. I said my mother had worked the front desk at a dental clinic part-time for years. Then she asked about my father. I said he was retired. Retired from what? She asked. He had a business, I told her, a short pause. She picked up her wine glass. I see, she said. 2 words, perfectly polite, and everyone at that table understood exactly what she meant by them. Her brother Cole, 36, broad shoulders and a salesman's handshake, caught my eye and gave me a small smile. The kind people give you when they want you to know they're in on something you're not. Nicole changed the subject, mentioned a restaurant she'd been to recently. The conversation moved on. I let it move on. That was my first mistake. It didn't stop after that dinner. Over the next several months, Sandra developed a real talent for the small public cut. At a friend's birthday party, she introduced my parents to someone she knew. And these are Walt's parents, Earl and Joan. Such simple, honest people. Said it like a compliment. It wasn't. Gordon was worse, in a different way. Didn't bother wrapping it. At a backyard barbecue late that summer, a knot of men were standing around the grill talking business, and I heard him say, loud enough to carry, "Nicole's always been independent. She picked herself a hard worker." Not exactly what we pictured, but... And he left the sentence right there. The men around him nodded. I didn't say anything that afternoon, but that night I sat Nicole down at her kitchen table and told her plainly, "If your family keeps talking about my dad like that, I need to know you'll say something. Not for me, for him." She looked at me across that table, careful, not defensive, not dismissive. The kind of careful look you give when you already know the answer and aren't ready to say it. "I'll handle it," she said. "I want to be clear about something. I didn't stay because I was a pushover. I stayed because I'd watched my old man go 30 years without asking anybody for anything, and the least I could do was try to build something with the woman I loved before deciding it couldn't work. I gave her a fair shot, but I'd drawn a line. I just hadn't said it out loud yet. I should have. The bridal shower happened at the Aldridge house. Maybe 35 people. A Saturday afternoon, catered food, flowers everywhere, the whole production. My parents came because that's what family does. My father wore a sport coat and slacks. He'd polished his shoes. He stood near my mother at the edge of the room and watched the whole thing with the same expression he wore, watching the evening news. Patient. Taking it all in, unbothered. Sandra found him within the first 10 minutes. "Earl," she said, loud enough for the cluster of women nearby to hear, "do you need a ride sorted out for later? We can arrange something." Said it with a wide smile. The kind that comes preloaded with its own explanation. She was being thoughtful. She was being generous, wasn't she? My father looked at her for a moment. "I'm fine, Sandra," he said. "Thanks for the concern." That was it. No edge in his voice, no shift in his face. Didn't explain he'd driven himself. Didn't mention the truck. Just answered and let the silence after it do whatever work it needed to do. Sandra blinked once and turned away. I could see even from across the room that his calm had irritated her worse than an argument would have. Later that afternoon, I noticed a man I didn't recognize. Mid-50s, well-dressed, one of Gordon's business contacts, looking at my father from across the room. Not a hostile look. More like someone trying to place a face he'd seen before. He pulled out his phone, seemed to think better of it, and put it away. On the drive home, I asked my father if he'd noticed what that man had done. "They don't know me, son," he said. "That's their problem, not mine." I didn't fully understand what he meant. Not yet. A week before the wedding, I went to pick up Nicole from her parents' place. Let myself in the side door. She'd given me a key months earlier. I heard voices from the kitchen. The door was half open. I wasn't trying to listen, but voices carry, Sandra's. "You could still call this off. Devon Ashworth is a better match, you know that." A pause. "Nicole." "Mom, the wedding's in a week, Sandra." "Exactly, there's still time." I stood in the hallway a few seconds. Then I went back out the side door and sat in my truck. Here's what I knew about the Ashworths. Old Burlington money, commercial development, exactly the kind of family Sandra had been grooming for years. I'd heard the name once or twice in passing. Devon went to Western, ran part of his father's firm now. Never thought much of it. I sat in that truck for 20 minutes, went over everything, what I'd heard, what it meant, what I was going to do about it, and then I made the worst call of the whole year. I went back in, knocked on the door, pretended I'd just arrived. I want to be honest about why. I wasn't scared of a confrontation. I stayed quiet because I needed to know if Nicole was in on it, or if she was just trying to manage her mother. I thought I'd find out at the wedding. Thought I'd see, in the moment it counted, which way she'd lean. I gave her one more week's benefit of the doubt. I should have known by then. Some answers don't need proof. The rehearsal dinner was at a place in Yorkville. White tablecloths, low lighting. The kind of restaurant where the menu doesn't list prices because the people eating there don't ask. Sandra had picked it. Mentioned twice in the first 20 minutes, and once more after the appetizers that she and Gordon were covering the bill. My parents arrived on time. My father wore his good suit, the charcoal one, double-breasted, kept zipped in a garment bag in the back of the closet. He looked good. More than good. Like a man who didn't need to dress for anybody but had taken the trouble anyway. Gordon greeted them near the door. Looked at my father, nodded once, shook my mother's hand. Not my father's. Just a nod. My mother noticed. I watched her eyes flick to her husband's face, checking. My father's expression didn't change. Midway through dinner, Sandra stood to say a few words. Thanked the venue, thanked the guests, said nice things about Nicole. Then she turned slightly toward the end of the table where my parents sat and said, with a warm smile doing a lot of heavy lifting, and we're so glad Walt's family could be here. Earl, it's wonderful you made it out. Like he'd traveled from somewhere difficult, like his presence required acknowledgement, the way a generous donation would. Under the table, my mother found my hand, held it for a second. I didn't look over. My father picked up his fork and kept eating. Near the end of the night, Sandra pulled me aside by the coat check. Looked at me with a practiced concern. I just want tomorrow to go smoothly for everyone, she said. Your dad might feel out of his depth with the kind of crowd we're having. Just keep an eye on it if you can. I looked at her for a moment. My father has never embarrassed anyone in his life, I said. She smiled. Of course, I didn't sleep that night. Lay on top of the hotel sheets staring at the ceiling, trying to work out if I was doing the right thing. Not the wedding specifically, everything. The way I'd let things run this long. The way I kept drawing lines in my head and pushing them back every time somebody got close to one. At 1 a.m, I called my father. He picked up on the second ring. Still up, he said. Doesn't surprise me. Just checking in. Yeah, I said. We didn't talk about anything important for a few minutes. He asked if the hotel room was decent. I said it was fine. Then I asked him what I'd been carrying all day. You good with all this? A pause. I could hear the TV on low down the hall in his room, some nature program, something about the water. I'm fine, son, he said. They're not kind to you. No, I said. They're not. And that doesn't get to you? Wasn't really a question. He answered it anyway. People show you who they are, he said. I've seen enough of it that it doesn't have to bother me. I didn't have anything to say to that. Before he hung up, he said something I've turned over 100 times since. Whatever happens tomorrow, you don't owe anybody your dignity. Remember that. I told him goodnight. Lay there another hour in the dark, turning his words over. He'd said whatever happens. Not no matter what they say. Like he'd already planned something. I told myself it was just a father being a father. I was wrong about that too. My father and I shared the same suite, the room the hotel had set aside for the groom's family. He was already up when I came out of the bedroom. Standing at the bathroom mirror, knotting his tie. Rented suit, white shirt, the same polished shoes from the bridal shower. He looked entirely at ease, hands steady, same expression he always wore, open, unhurried, like he was waiting for something he already knew was coming. You good, Dad? I asked. Always, he said. He caught my eye in the mirror while I fixed my own knot. You love her? He asked. Yeah. Then do what you need to do today. Not what anybody else needs you to do. I didn't know what to do with that. Just nodded. My phone buzzed. Cole Aldridge. Heads up, Sandra wants your dad seated near the back. Less visible. Her words. Thought you should know. I read it twice. Cole had sent it the way some people do these things. Not to help you, but to watch what you do with it. To be part of what happened next without any of the responsibility. I put the phone back in my jacket pocket without answering. My father was at the window, looking out at the parking lot. He reached into the inside pocket of his vest and pulled something out. A plain white envelope, legal-sized, slightly worn at the corners. Looked at it a moment, not long. Folded it once, put it back. Ready? He asked. Yeah, I said. We went downstairs. I never asked about the envelope. Wish I had asked sooner. The grand ballroom at the Royal York could hold 500 people. And that day capacity was exactly that. White chairs in long rows, floral arrangements taller than I was. A string quartet near the entrance. The kind of room that makes everything feel formal before anything's even happened. I found out where my parents had been seated when I came in with the wedding party. Row 8, left side, partially behind a marble column. From that angle you could see the altar, but nobody looking from the altar could easily see you. The Aldridges sat front row. I stood at the altar and looked at that column, and something went quiet inside me. Not anger. Something flatter than that. The feeling you get when you've been telling yourself a story about a person, and suddenly realize the story was never true. The ceremony started, the quartet played. Nicole walked in on Gordon's arm looking beautiful, and I kept my face exactly where it needed to be. During the ring exchange, Gordon leaned toward Sandra and said something. Quiet, but not quiet enough. Two women in the second row glanced at each other. I caught one word: laborer. Sandra smiled, and that's when I saw him again. The man from the bridal shower. I'd later learn his name was Phil Castellano, though I didn't have a name for him yet. He was seated near the front with a cluster of Gordon's business associates. Looked at my father. Really looked. Pulled out his phone, held it a second like he was deciding something, then put it away again. He'd already made up his mind, just didn't know yet what it was. The reception started the way these things do. Noise filling the room, glasses raised, the band shifting from ceremonial music into something with more energy. 500 people talking at once creates a kind of pressure in a room, presses against your chest. My parents found their table. I watched my father pull out my mother's chair. She sat. He smoothed his jacket and sat beside her. Two people at a table of strangers, perfectly composed. Sandra went first, stood at the microphone near the head table and spoke for about 6 minutes. Talked about the Aldridge family, their history in Oakville, their values, what Nicole meant to them. She was good at this, her voice carried weight. People listened. She didn't mention my parents once. Earl and Joan Brennan, the groom's parents, didn't exist inside Sandra's 6 minutes. Gordon followed with something shorter. Said I was a hard worker. Said the family was thrilled to have me. Said hard worker, the way some men say it, not as praise, as a category, the way you describe something useful that doesn't require much thought. Polite applause. I stood to take the mic and say something simple, thank everyone, move things along. Sandra didn't step back. Oh, we're not quite finished, she said, not letting go of the microphone. Her smile hadn't changed. She was looking at someone near the back of the room. I followed her gaze. She was looking at my father's table. I'd seen that smile before. In the kitchen doorway, at the rehearsal dinner, the one she put on once she'd already decided something, and the moment had just arrived on schedule. I went very still. The band stopped playing. Somebody must have signaled them, or maybe they just felt the shift in the room. Either way, the music cut out, and the silence after it had weight. Sandra turned slightly toward my father's table, held the microphone the way someone holds a thing they've kept close for years. I want to say something about the Brennan family, she started. Her voice was warm, thoughtful, the voice of someone giving a toast at a charity gala. Walt comes from humble beginnings, and I'm sure his father, Earl, did the best he could for him. A pause. Let it land. Then she turned to the woman beside her, one of her country club friends she'd met maybe twice, and whose name I never quite caught, and said still through the microphone, voice unchanged, "That's not a father. That's just trash that showed up." A few people laughed, short sounds, almost reflexive. A large part of the room went quiet. That particular silence, 500 people make deciding what to do with something they just heard. I turned to Nicole. She was staring at the table. Then, like she felt my eyes on her, she looked up. Our eyes met for half a second, and at the corner of her mouth, something small and involuntary. Just a flicker, a smile. She looked away from me immediately. I looked at my father. He hadn't moved, hands flat on the table. His face was... I don't have words for it that aren't too small. He looked like a man who'd already decided, long before that moment, that other people's cruelty wasn't something requiring a response. My mother had a cloth napkin pressed to her mouth. I pushed my chair back and stood. 500 people watched me cross the floor. Nobody said anything. The room had that tight, held breath feeling where everyone can sense something's happening, but nobody knows yet which direction it's going to break. I walked to where Sandra stood. She was still holding the mic. I reached out and she handed it over, not because she wanted to, but because the momentum of the moment made it the only logical thing to do. I turned and faced the room. "I want to thank everyone for coming today," I said. "I mean that." A pause, long enough to take its own shape. But I'm not going to stand here and listen to my father get talked about like that. Not in front of 500 people. Not anywhere. I turned to Nicole. She was gripping the edge of the table. "I asked you once what you'd do if your family ever crossed that line. You said you'd handle it. Walt don't." You smiled. She didn't answer. "This wedding's over." I set the microphone down on the table beside me. Didn't drop it, didn't throw it. Set it down, the way you put something away when you're done using it. Then I did the hardest thing in that room. I didn't say anything else. No explanation, no argument, no attempt to make Sandra understand. Because Sandra was never going to understand, and I was done spending my time on that. Somebody near the back said something low. A chair scraped. One of the bridesmaids made a small, sharp sound. I wasn't angry, I was clear. Those are different things. Took me years to understand the difference, and it turned out to matter more than anything else that happened in that room. Gordon stood up from his seat. You can't do this. Pointed a finger at me. The gesture of a man who spent his life telling people what to do. Do you have any idea what this is? Sit down, I said, calm even. He didn't sit. Sandra stepped forward, still holding on to her composure, though barely. Walt, you're making a scene. Sit down, we can talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. I turned. My father was standing. He'd gotten up without any fuss. No dramatic chair shove, no announcement. Just standing, jacket straight, face calm. My mother had a hand on his arm. I looked at him across the room. He looked back. Let's go, Dad. He held my gaze a moment. Then he nodded once. The way he nodded when something was decided and didn't need any more discussion. And he came around the table. Walked past Sandra without looking at her. Not out of contempt. There was simply nothing there that required his attention. We headed for the exit. My mother followed, clutching her small purse, the napkin still in her other hand. 500 people watched us leave. The room started finding its rhythm again behind us. Chairs turning, voices low and urgent, people leaning into each other. In the middle of all that, Sandra Aldridge stood near the head table with a microphone she no longer held and a room she no longer controlled. I didn't look back at her. Near the stage, at a table with Gordon's business associates, Phil Castellano stood up, watched my father walk past, then reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The hallway outside the ballroom was carpeted, quiet. The sounds of the reception came muffled through the closed double doors. We stood near the elevator bank, my father, my mother, me, waiting in that particular silence of people who've just walked out of somewhere and haven't decided yet what comes next. My mother spoke first, said my name, just my name. I know, I said. The elevator button was still lit. I watched the number above the doors count down. Excuse me. The voice came from behind us. Quick footsteps on the carpet. We turned. The man from the ballroom, the one who'd been watching my father. He was a little out of breath, like he'd hurried. Earl Brennan? My father turned, looked at the man for half a second, the way he looked at everything, taking it in without reacting. Phil, he said. They knew each other. Phil stopped a few feet away, glanced at me, then back at my father. I'm sorry to do this here. Didn't want to say anything in there, but I've sat on the advisory board for your funds for 4 years. Didn't put it together that you... He stopped. Didn't know your son was getting married. Didn't connect it until tonight. My father said, this is my son. Phil turned to me, put his hand out. Phil Castellano. I run Ironbridge Capital Partners. Your father's our principal silent partner. We're talking north of 300 million in assets under management. I shook his hand, not sure what my face was doing. What? I said. My father was watching me. There are things you never needed to know, son, he said. Until now. We moved down the hall, away from the elevator, to a sitting area near a window. My mother sat, my father stood. Phil apologized and stepped away a minute later. Said he had my father's number, that he'd be in touch, and then it was just the three of us. My father told me everything. He'd started the towing and recovery company in 1991, 2 years before I was born. Built it out of one truck and a rented garage bay off Burlington Street. For close to 30 years he ran it quiet. No press, no profile, no plaques on a wall. He didn't want any of that. In 2018 he sold the operation to a private infrastructure group, for a number he said out loud exactly once. Because you're my son and you've got a right to know. $1.2 billion. After that, nothing changed. Not the house, not the truck, not the newspaper. Wanted you to have a real life, he said. Not a life of show. Wanted to know you'd make decisions based on who you are, not what I've got. I sat with that a minute. Why didn't you ever? Because the answer was always going to be the same. You didn't need it to be who you are. He reached into his jacket, the envelope he'd been holding that morning. Set it on the cushion beside me. That's an asset transfer I had drawn up last month. Part of it in your name. Meant to be a wedding gift. I didn't open it, just looked at it. He said, you walked out of that room for me. That's worth more than anything in that envelope. Behind us, through the ballroom doors, I could hear the low murmur of 500 voices starting to understand what they'd just watched. Phil went back into the ballroom. Wasn't trying to start anything. Had a client at one of the tables and wasn't the type to make a scene. But he also wasn't the type to keep something like that to himself when the right person asked. The right person asked within 5 minutes. Businessmen in the same room tend to know each other, or know of each other, and the name Earl Brennan, if you knew where to look, was tied to a deal from 2018 that had made the trade press. 15 minutes after Phil walked back through those doors, two people had already searched the name on their phones. Within 20 minutes, the information was moving table to table, the quiet, deliberate way. Important information moves among people who understand what it means. Gordon's phone buzzed. He looked at it. A message from someone who'd been at Phil's table. 6 words. Do you know who his father is? Gordon stared at the screen, searched the name. The first result was a trade newsletter piece. In 2018, Brennan Recovery Group sold for an estimated $1.2 billion in one of the year's largest infrastructure deals. He turned to Sandra, showed her the screen without a word. She took the phone, read it, looked up, set it down on the table. Around them, the room kept making noise. People at other tables were piecing it together, leaning in to listen. That particular electric hum of a crowd realizing the story they'd been watching wasn't the one they thought it was. Sandra Aldridge stayed perfectly still, hands on the table, both of them shaking slightly. Cole saw it from 2 seats down, looked at the screen, said quietly, "Mom." She didn't answer him. Nicole found me in the hallway about 30 minutes later. My parents had gone up to their room. I was still sitting in the seating area by the window, jacket off, staring at nothing. She'd been crying. Mascara had held up. Everything she'd done for the wedding was still in place, but her eyes were red and she kept fussing with the sleeve of her dress. She sat across from me. "I didn't know she was going to say that," she said. "I believe you," I said. She looked up. "I didn't put her up to it. I didn't. It wasn't something I planned." "Nicole," I said, steady. You smiled. "I was nervous. It was a reflex. I know, and I did know. I'd been thinking about it for the 40 minutes since it happened, and I knew exactly what kind of smile that was. Not cruel, not deliberate, just the smile of someone who felt relieved that some pressure had finally broken loose. Even if the way it broke was ugly. That was the part I couldn't get past. I'd asked you months ago, told you exactly what I needed. You looked me in the eye and promised you'd handle it. And when it came down to it, you looked at the table and smiled." She was quiet a long time. Then she said, "My mother had an arrangement with the Ashworth family. It's not that I was going to go through with it, but she kept—" "I know about that too," I said. She went still. "I heard them talking," I said, "a week ago, in the kitchen." The hallway was quiet around us. Off in the distance, through the walls, you could hear the muffled sound of a wedding winding down in a way nobody had planned. "I don't think you're a bad person," I told her. "I think you're someone who'll always choose her family when it matters most, and I can't build a life with someone who looks at my father the way yours does." She didn't argue. That, more than anything, told me what I needed to know. "Take care, Nicole." I grabbed my jacket and headed for the elevator. My father's phone rang at 9:17 that night. He looked at the screen, then set it face up on the small desk in the hotel room so I could see who was calling. Sandra Aldridge. He let it ring twice, then he picked up. "Mr. Brennan." Her voice was different, slower. The warmth that used to wrap around everything she said was gone, and what was underneath was just a woman who'd done the math and landed on a number she didn't like. "I think there may have been a misunderstanding today." "There's no misunderstanding, Sandra," my father said. Calm, not cold, just finished. "You said what you meant to say. If I'd known who that's exactly the problem." He ended the call. Set the phone on the desk, looked at it a moment, then walked over to the window and stood with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the Toronto skyline. Office towers lighting up against the dark. I was sitting on the edge of one of the beds, still in my dress shirt. Watched him. He wasn't enjoying it. Nothing in the way he stood looked like satisfaction. He just stood there like a man who'd already said what he needed to say, and had no interest in saying anything else. After a while, he turned around. "You good?" he asked. "Getting there," I said. He nodded. Found the TV remote, clicked it on, flipped through until he found a fishing program. Sat in the chair by the window. We didn't talk much after that. Just sat together in the room, TV low, the city outside doing its own thing. That was enough. In the weeks that followed, things happened to the Aldridge family that I only connected later. Gordon had a pending commercial development deal with Ironbridge Capital, a mixed-use site on Toronto's East End, financing worth something like $4 million. He'd been chasing it for nearly 4 months. After the wedding, emails stopped getting answered. Not rejected, not denied. Just no response. Gordon's contact at the firm had been promoted. The new person was extremely polite and extremely hard to reach. The deal went into review with no defined timeline. Sandra sat on the advisory board of a local arts foundation, the kind where having your name in the program means something. That fall she was asked, without much explanation, to step down. The foundation's largest anonymous donor had quietly raised concerns about the direction of the advisory structure. Nobody told Sandra who the donor was. Cole lost a client, a referral he'd had for 2 years, a family that had bought and sold property through him reliably, who suddenly switched to another agent. He never found out why. None of them ever knew for certain whether any of it connected. That's the thing about my father. He didn't move loud. Things just shifted, the way rivers shift because of what's upstream, not because of anything visible on the surface. What I know is this. My father didn't plan any of it, didn't set out to ruin anybody. He was just a man who existed in certain rooms, and those rooms carried weight. Sometimes that's enough. 3 weeks after the wedding that didn't happen, I called that logistics company in Calgary. The position was still open. The hiring manager said he'd been hoping I'd reach back out. I told him I was interested. He said they could have an offer to me by the end of the week. I thanked him and hung up. I drove out to Hamilton that weekend and told my parents over dinner. My mother made a pot roast, the kind she only cooked when she felt like something needed steadying. My father listened to all of it, then said, "You should have taken that 2 years ago." I laughed. First time I'd laughed in 3 weeks. Felt something settle back into place, a little at a time. After dinner, I sat at the kitchen table while my mother washed the dishes and my father read the paper. The same table I grew up at, the same kitchen. The curtain over the sink still the same one from when I was 12. I watched my father's hands on the newspaper. Big hands, the kind that look like they've done real work, even though the work he'd actually done most of his life happened in boardrooms and on conference calls. He'd built something real, and never once felt the need to tell anybody about it. Not me, not the neighbors, not the people at the bridal shower who saw a rented suit and decided they knew what it meant. I thought about that for a long time. I moved to Calgary in October, took one suitcase and the envelope my father had given me, still unopened. Calgary, that time of year, is dry and bright in a way that surprised me. I liked that. Needed somewhere nobody knew what had happened. Found a place in Bridgeland, small, good light in the mornings, a short drive to the office. Bought a coffee maker, set it on the counter, went back to work. The new job was harder than the old one, which turned out to be exactly what I needed. My father flew out in February, told me he was coming, didn't ask. Just said he'd be there on the 14th and asked if the airport was easy to get to from where I lived. I told him it was. He said good. Showed up in the same clothes as always, Carhartt jacket, good boots. Looked around my apartment, gave a small nod, said, "Good light." That afternoon we walked along the river path, west toward the bridges. Cold out, sky clear, the water that flat gray color it gets in winter. We walked mostly in silence, the comfortable kind, the kind you earn. At some point I asked him about what he'd been carrying since October. "Why didn't you ever tell me any of this?" He walked a few more steps before answering. Didn't seem to be searching for the words, just giving the answer the space it needed. "Wanted to see who you'd turn into without it." "And?" I asked. He looked at me. "I'm proud of you," he said. 3 words, said them plainly. No ceremony, the way he did everything. I didn't say anything back. Didn't need to. We kept walking. The river moved alongside us. The city carried on overhead. There's something I've thought about a lot in the months since. Not the dramatic parts, not the ballroom, not Sandra's face, not the quiet phone call back to Hamilton. Something smaller. The curtain over the kitchen sink in Hamilton. My parents never replaced it. The same curtain I used to stare at as a kid eating breakfast. Faded a little on top where the sun hit it. My father could have bought 10,000 kitchen curtains. Could have replaced the truck, the house, the furniture. Had the means to do it twice over and never once thought about it. Wasn't faking modesty. Wasn't hiding from anything. Just decided at some point that the life he wanted to live didn't require any of that, and he lived it completely, without ever looking back to see if anyone approved. I think about what I got wrong in those 2 years with Nicole. Not loving her. That was real, and I'm not ashamed of it. The mistake was staying past the point the information was clear. I kept giving her the benefit of the doubt, because I wanted the story to come out a certain way. That's on me, and I own it. What I didn't get wrong was that table in that ballroom. I wasn't wrong the moment I stood up and said what I said. I've been told my whole life, without really hearing it, that there are things you don't trade away. Not for comfort, not for convenience, not to keep the peace at a table full of people who'd already decided what you were worth. The man who taught me that was sitting in row 8, behind a marble column, in a rented suit and shoes he polished himself. He was the most valuable person in that room. Always had been. People sometimes ask if I regret how it went down. The moment, the room, the 500 people. No. Not because of what I found out afterward about my father. Not because of the envelope, or Phil Castellano, or whatever quietly happened to Gordon's deal in the months that followed. Those things are part of the story, but they're not the reason. The reason is simpler than that. My father was 10 feet away from me when somebody called him trash into a live microphone. And the only question that mattered in that moment was, what kind of man am I? I gave the answer I could live with. Everything else came after. I opened the envelope in my apartment in Calgary sometime in March. Won't tell you the number. But I sat with it a while, then folded it and set it on the desk. Went and made myself a coffee. Stood at the window looking out at the street. My father called that night. Asked if I'd opened it yet. I told him I had. Asked what I thought. I told him it was a lot to take in. He said it was mine to do whatever I wanted with. Then he told me about a fishing show he'd watched the night before. That's Earl Brennan. That's him. I don't know what happened to Nicole. Heard secondhand the Ashworth arrangement never came together. I wish her well. I mean that. As for me, I've got a good job, a small apartment with decent light, and a father I call every few days who still reads a paper newspaper at his kitchen table.